This is Ann Tainer. I'm with the History Museum. We have with us today Randy Molt, which was Vaudrey Molt's nephew, and we're happy to hear stories that he gave us about living here and growing up here. And he also brought us some papers that were very interesting that he found in the old barn, along with a couple of utensils that the workers used to use. So we appreciate that very much, and we appreciate him making a trip and making the effort to do so.
Before they built the causeway, we used to come over in the boat and go down Pines Canal and go over to the beach. The Pines Canal right there used to be a beach club right there. My dad would take the boat and would go down Pines Canal and would stop right there at the end of the canal and walk over to the beach. And there used to be a beach club right there where you're pointing. They was a place to change clothes and stuff. That was before they built the causeway. There's Mast Island, Mast Isle.
The towers. This at Pines Canal is the canal that runs part way just before you get to the entrance of the park. So it's at the very end. Yeah, it's at the very end. And then they filled this in and built the towers.
Yeah, 75% of all this has been filled.
Yeah.
It used to be swamp. See that road there? That's the way the roads used to be.
Right. It was called the Davis House. And Davis was the one that purchased Cape Florida.
Right.
For like $100 and then sold most of it in front to the government, but they kept a portion of it where the lighthouse is.
Where the bank was, if you notice, there's the big palm trees on the side. If you notice, sometimes when you look down to the development, every once in a while you'll see a big, huge royal palm tree. And that's what was left over from these roads. That's what used to be like. The Crandon Boulevard more or less looked like that when we first moved out, before they paved it and all. The road going to the yacht club looked like that. But it used to be the Hacienda House. It was where they transported all the stuff from Coconut Grove. Before they built the causeway, we used to come over in the boat and go down Pines Canal and go over to the beach. They started before the war, but after they stopped building the causeway during the war, they opened it back up again. And they had a grand opening with Rickenbacker and everybody. And I went with my dad and my mother, and we went to Crandon Park. And then the circle was the end of the road over by Calusa. My dad liked it so much, we came back, they had 3 model houses behind where the drugstore is now. It used to be a grocery store. At that time, there was nothing. There was no shopping center or nothing.
No gas station?
Nothing, just the 3 model houses, the dirt roads. So he picked out one. I think the total cost was a lot of money at this time, $12,500 we paid. That was for the middle house. For the size houses, that was considered a lot of money. Anyway, we moved in, one of the first maybe 10 or 15 families. We used to come over and watch them build the house on the weekends. And they would sod it and we moved in. So I was like 12 years old. And I'm 87 now, so that was a long time ago. The first house was on Curtis Wood, 798 Curtis Wood. That was the first bunch of houses, the 700 block. My mother's house, they tore it down, they built a bigger house, and they tore the bigger house down and put a bigger house. So now it's got a 3-story house instead of a 2-story house.
The streets that they flood or?
Oh, it used to be bad. I had a surfboard, I used to paddle up and down the streets before they put in the sewers. It used to be really bad here. Flooding was terrible, yeah. It was all part of getting used to. I bought a house on Warren Lane. I paid all of $20,000 for my house. They said, well, you know, you can go to Keller Ridge and get a bigger house for $20,000. And I said, no thanks, I'll live on Key Biscayne, which was the best thing I ever did, really. Except selling my house when I did Now they're worth over $1 million, I guess.
When did you move off the key?
About 20 years ago, we would never go off the island Sunday afternoon. We would go Sunday morning. Then they built the drawbridge and it got a lot better. But the traffic used to be backed up all the way to Cape Florida. People would be stopped out in the middle of the road having picnics, and it was terrible. But back in those days, except on the weekends, there was no traffic. You know, it took me over an hour to get here today. I just made it just on time. I walked in. But it was nice. It was great growing up here. It was a paradise for kids. I had a little Boston whaler. I had a boat ever since I was like 12 years old. As soon as I moved out here, I had a little boat. I loved it. I fished every day. I would go to Masta Island, Masta Point. My mother would say, I would like to have fish tonight. Why don't you go down and catch some fish? I would go to Masta Point, we'd catch mackerel and snapper and trout, and I'd bring them home. We didn't go to the beach on the ocean. We used to go on the bay side, you know, where the helicopter pad is now. There was a nice beach there. The water was nice and calm all the time, and we always went there. Then it was the island paradise. Really the island paradise. And for kids growing up, it was like an adventure. I went to Coral Gables High School the first year it opened. They had a school bus.
Remember any of the kids that you used to hang with? Went to school with?
Yeah, there's not too many left now. There's one, Bob Carter. He used to live at Harbor Point next to my uncle. As far as I know, he's still around, but there's only about 6 or 7 my age. There was a lot of them younger, my brother's age. They were we were the original Key Rats, actually. They were a little bit younger than us. But the ones I went to school with, there was like 6 kids that were high school or junior high age. They didn't have an elementary school or anything. Everybody was bused. Yeah, that was kind of bad because we couldn't do after-school activities or stuff, you know.
Were the Key Rats a tight-knit group? Were they really good?
Yeah, they were a little bit younger than us. We were kind of like the original ones. We used to pull pranks and stuff.
Your kids.
I can't even tell you what some of them were. The cops might still get it. First day they opened the park, we went there. They had the train. They used to have their little rides for the kids, little boats that go around in circles, and horses that had a merry-go-round. Of course, they had a skating rink. We used to go roller skating at night over there. I don't know if they still have it or not. But the Crandon Park was it was crowded. Back in the old days, you couldn't find a place in the parking lot to park your car. I mean, that was the place to go. We used to call it Sherwood Forest, we would call it, back in those days. Kinds of botanical trees from Churchill Garden. And what happened was about 40 years ago, he was getting not paying taxes. And they said, well, you have to have a plantation. You have to grow coconuts or something. Otherwise, we're going to tax you for this. So he cut down all the trees except for a few big ones and planted coconuts there. And then they little sprouts just for tax. You know, they wanted to raise his taxes because he had agricultural because of the plantation, but when they stopped with the plantation, so he planted coconuts there. There used to be a big pit full of alligators right there, right about a block away here where the park is. And every time they would catch an alligator, they would go on. I remember one time in Vernon's drugstore, that was the center of activity. And everybody's there in the morning having breakfast. And there was about an 8-foot alligator by the front door. Nobody could leave. They all had to go out the back door to go home. So there used to be alligators out here and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
We used to go to the Hacienda House, which was where the warehouse where they brought all the equipment and everything from Coconut Grove to Key Biscayne. And they had like a dock there. And that's where the yacht club is now. And they used to be there was just all swamps back there. There's just a road going there. And when we were kids, we used to go and we would camp out at night. We'd sleep in, and you could hear the lions roaring and the monkeys and stuff. And it was scary, you know.
I bet it was real.
And then we used to go to Cape Florida, spend the night, camp out at Cape Florida. There was a guy named Tony that was a guard. And he would catch us and chase us out. But we used to go to Hurricane Hole and go fishing and go down by the lighthouse. We would climb up into the lighthouse when we were kids. The bottom floor was blocked off, but there was a ladder on the outside that went up to the window. And we would climb up the ladder, and about every third stair was missing. And we would climb. That was a big thing, to go up to the top of the lighthouse. That was before it was restored back in those days. This was before there was a park. It was just abandoned. It was just nothing there. So we would sneak up, we'd go, you know, we knew how to get there. Or we would walk up the beach to the lighthouse. But yeah, and we would go to No Name Hole and go fishing, go camping, and yeah, it was really neat. Originally was on the volunteer fire department here. I retired for 27 years with Miami-Dade Fire Department, and I worked at this fire station for about 5 years. Ron Huber was one of them. And, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go down and take a look at that old fire engine. It was funny because they would shut off the sirens. They'd have to call the Key Biscayne Hotel. And before that, they had nothing at all before they built the hotel. The original fire engine was the little one out front. They bought a new fire engine, which wasn't much better, and they took this one and set it on the side of the gas station, which is next to where the fire lean-to was. And it sat there in the woods for years. And I worked for a lady, Marilyn Revere. She was pretty eccentric. So she saw the fire engine one day and she said, well, could we fix that up? And I said, well, let me find out. So evidently they gave it to Johnny and Tony gas station. It was sitting on the side. And I asked Tony, I said, what's the deal with it? And he said, well, we got to throw it away. It's just rotten here. So Marilyn said, asked Tony, can you guys fix it up so we can drive it around the Key? Back in those days, there was no cops out here or nothing. You could drive whatever you wanted to. And he said, sure. He got it drivable. I took it over to the barn because she had leased the barn out from Matheson to keep her horses.
Here on the Key, was
Across from the park, there was a big barn right on Crandon Boulevard. The horses I know was Marilyn Revere. She had horses that she kept them at the old barn. This was a big barn. It was right off Crandon on the other side of the road, right about where that sign is for the hotel. And she used to have a ring where she would ride her horses around. Very eccentric lady. She bought 4 houses. One was hers, one for her son, and 2 for the guests. And she put a fence around all of them and made like a big compound.
And where were these houses at on the Key? Do you remember?
It's on, I think it was on Allendale. I know where it's at, but it's been a long time since. It was on Allendale. But evidently later they sold the houses separately and put them back together. But she bought this 1917 American LaFrance fire engine, had it completely restored, put it in her living room. And one day I was one of my jobs, and a fireman came up. He was working his days off, doing work there. And we started talking. He said, hey, you're doing a good job of cleaning up that fire engine. Maybe you should join the fire department. So I did. So that's how I got on the fire department, the regular Miami Fire Department. Her name was Marilyn Revere. Her father was a senator from Maryland, She was married to Paul Revere, which original descendant from the original Paul Revere. They were both very nice, and they both had a lot of money and very eccentric. She took the horse one time and drove it into there was 2 bars on Key Biscayne, one called the Rendezvous.
Right.
And that was so raunchy, they finally closed it down. That got so wild. And the other one was over by it was next to the Hurricane Harbor Lounge. She had 2 kids, that's where the horses were. She used to go to the horse show circuit all over, up in Maryland, Virginia, the jumpers, you know, and I would go along with them. That was part of my job. One of them was 10 and one was 11 at the time. And they had a boat, a yacht, I was actually the boat captain on their boat, and I did all other stuff too. And so one day I thought, yeah, I'm gonna walk up in the attic and see what's up there. And I went up in the attic, and that's where I found all this stuff. It was just scattered on the floor. Somebody had evidently been up there and got most of the stuff. So I collected it and took it home, and I figured someday, if you ever view a museum out here, I'll give it. Well, I've had it for 65 years. This is this cup that the workers would use, and a spoon for the coffee. And these keys, I guess, they were part of the barn also. Plus, I found all those papers. And I figured, well, they were scattered all over the floor up in the attic. Somebody had evidently taken all the good stuff, but this is what they didn't want, so I took it home with me. Now, these are over 100 years old. You saw there was 1,200 tractors out here, 80 trucks and 1,200 tractors. It was a big deal. There was a lot of people working out here at one time. Well, most of this stuff was during the 30s. There's also a lot of papers from Matheson where he had sold property to people during the Depression, and they were defaulting on their loans. This is 1928, during the Depression. See, you may be willing to hold the balance of the payments of the land if people were losing their property because they couldn't afford to pay for it. This was Matheson, Commodore Matheson. See, Hugh Matheson, 1928. Evidently, Mr. Matheson had a development in Coconut Grove called Estrada Estates. And during the Depression, 1928, people couldn't pay the mortgages. See, it says right here, the lot 25 Estrada Estate, can you hold it for another year? So they were all writing him, telling him, can you just please, you know, I can't afford to pay the mortgage now, you can take back the land. I had this one, there was 1,200 and some tractors. Well, these are just commissary stuff. All these are during 1930. They're all requisitioned for the commissary for 1,250 tractors. This, to me, is the most interesting thing of all. It's very hard to read now, but basically what it is, he wrote a letter to Botanical Gardens in London asking if it was feasible to start a coconut plantation on Key Biscayne, which was at latitude, longitude, such and such. They wrote him back and said, anything above 15 degrees north, we don't recommend starting a coconut plantation. And they wrote him back, and this was probably the envelope that they sent the information to him. And on the back of the envelope, I'm sure he must have copied this and sent it. This was just a brief. Basically, he said, well, that's all well and good, but we have a hot water heater. It's called the Gulf Stream, just 3 miles offshore, which makes me to believe that we can grow coconuts here. So that's what this is. This is very interesting. There was 2 people left over that Matheson kept. One was Mac and his wife Gussie, and they lived on the plantation. Gussie used to come over and do clean my mother's house every once in a while. and Mac would do yards. And they lived there for a long time. And finally, like in the 70s, Matheson bought them a house up in Fort Lauderdale somewhere, and they finally moved because that's where the Sonesta Beach, that when they sold the property. So they were on there till they sold it to the, and you know, they used to still, they had the Playhouse was over there. Then they moved it to Calusa Park, but it used to be in the, and there was a whole bunch of houses. There's people living back there. There's 4 or 5.
Originally, one of those houses became the Episcopal Church. I think Fawdry was heavily involved in doing that at that time.
Well, he did a lot of stuff for the church. I remember when they had the hurricane shelter, they tore it down, but it was like a 3-story building. It was just square, and they would go up to the top. The Mashta House was a church, was the community church, and they used to have services at the church over in Mashta Island.
Your father, what did he do?
He had a blueprint company. He sold it to my uncle, and my uncle did real well with it too.
So they made blueprints for building the building.
For buildings, yeah. But he wasn't an architect, but he made the prints. T-Square Triangle Company, yeah. Tip of 7 Harbor Point, there was a guy named Grover Loaning, which he was aircraft. He designed airplanes and engines. He was one of the original historians of aircraft. He was very famous. He built a lot of airplanes and stuff. He was kind of a strange old guy. And he had a house on the tip of Harbor Point, but the rest of that whole area was undeveloped. And we used to go to the beach there. And my uncle bought a house there. The lots on Hurricane Harbor were $20,000. And the houses were costing like from 12,000 to like 14 was the most expensive house. So that was, I bought my house for 20,000. I thought that was a lot at the time, but it was a good investment. Key Biscayne was a lot of fun when I was growing up. When I first moved out here, there was no stores at all. Then they built the one where Sir Pizza is, and it's now a drugstore. S&W supermarket. It was, I think, Whitey and somebody, Simpson.
This was over where the Golden Hog is now.
My brother is 10 years younger than me. So we were the first group, the ones, I graduated in 1955. There was only like 6 or 7 people. But the younger ones, then people started moving in. There was a lot more. There was a lot more kids. My brother's group, he had a whole bunch of kids. But to us, there was like a handful. There's only one left, and it's Bob Carter. He built the first house on Harbor Point. It was right next to where the helicopter pad is. His parents had a house on the bay, and he had a little house on the harbor. It's a little house. It was his house. They tore it down and built a great big place on that little piece of land. But yeah, then my uncle built his house on Harbor Point, and the rest is history, yeah. Well, I was a good friend of Bob Carter. His father lived right next door to Nixon on Harbor Point, and he had his fishing, sports fishing boat tied up there, and they went out with Mr. Carter, took Nixon, and I went out with it because I was a good friend of his son. Just went along for the ride one day.
And were there a lot of Secret Service on the boat?
Yeah, there was some, and they had a boat followed him. You know, back in those days, you couldn't put your boat. They had it all buoyed. You know, the area where the helicopter pad is. You couldn't go close to there. So, but Mr. Carter was right next door, so obviously we could go in there.
Did you get a chance to talk with President Nixon?
Well, I shook his hand, and that's about it, yeah. But they went out and did a little fishing.
Was his family on the boat or just?
No, just the Secret Service guys. It was just like for an hour or so.
Something.
I do have a card at home, his personal card with his say he signed it for me,
Oh, that was
but
nice.
I have that somewhere at home. Do I remember the 4th of July parade? I had a little dune buggy. I used to be on the parade with that. But I would go to the parade every year. Then we'd go to the beach club after the parade. There was one there for each year, just about. I saved them all. 1983, 1986, 1980. During the parade, they would stop and they'd call out the number, and if you had the number on there, you would win a prize. So travel, stuff like that, or the different people on the quay would give prizes like the hardware store and stuff. Right at the end of the parade, yeah, where they had the grandstands where the people would all gather around and they would call out the winners. You would buy them like $1 a piece, and you'd end up everybody would put them on, but then they would give prizes if you won. The stadium, the Marine Stadium. Remember, they don't have them anymore, but they used to have boat races there. Yeah, I saved them. I got about probably 30 or 40 in there. They were pretty much, they had a chowder chomper band. My uncle, we used to play the drum and the bicycles, and they would have a couple of floats, and people would put their boats and fix them up. It was just a local parade. I guess it's basically still the same pretty much. They would have a couple of high school bands, but it was, for a small town. I remember Dr. Hanworker, sure. His wife, Alma, yeah. Yeah, she was my doctor too. I worked at the Key Biscayne Hotel. That was one of the few places you could work back in those days. Worked parking cars, and as bellboy, and as a maintenance place, and as a lifeguard at the pool. So those sites, that was one of the first places you could work. And at the gas station, and there used to be a Dairy Queen here. And I worked at the Dairy Queen. Do you know where the Dairy Queen used to be here? It was right, there used to be a canal that ran all the way to the highway to the ocean. It's not here. They filled it all in. But the Dairy Queen was where the park is now. I used to work there, and all the kids used to hang out there.
Dick Cachera, he was a lifeguard.
Yeah, I knew him. He used to teach kids all the time how to swim. That was his thing. He would teach the little kids how to swim. That was at the Sandbar. There used to be this. It was a Silver Sands Motel. I used to work at the Key Colony. They used to have a golf course there. Like the lifeguard, but basically I would clean up the seaweed every day.
Yeah, they used to have a little par 9 golf course, and when the pro would go home at 4:30, everybody on the key would go over there and play for free.
Yeah, pitch and putt golf course. Yeah, it was a golf course, this little par 3 golf course. Where the Key Colony is? No, it wasn't the big one like this was just a pitch and putt golf course.
The Sheridan Hotel was there. They had tennis courts. The first tennis tournament in Miami was held there. And Chrissy Everett played there. There was a lot of name brands that played there. It was great because all the kids on the key at that time were ball boys. So it was a neat thing to do on the key.
Well, I remember the sandbar used to be, because they used to have the water would come down and clean off, because the salt would get on the glass, and that was the big deal. They would turn the water on.
Yeah, everybody thought they were going and seeing a waterfall, and actually it was just a hose that was running down the window.
Yeah, they would say, "Oh, look, it's raining outside."
Yeah. It was interesting back then because everywhere you went, from the sandbar to the keyhole to the Jamaica Inn, there was always somebody you knew. It was all locals. And I remember at the English pub, if you went into the English pub, half the time there would be fights going on.
The Jamaica Inn was a really nice restaurant. I loved the English pub. When they tore that down, that was a big mistake. Then they had the Hurricane Harbor Lounge. The Keyhole was the name of the place. And the Rendezvous. They had some really nice restaurants. And I loved to go to the pub. We used to go there all the time. You have your mug, everybody had a mug.
Right. Did you ever remember the restaurant, the Cove, that was over here?
Oh, yeah, Tony. The raccoons used to be up.
He was the cook, his wife was a waitress.
Remember the Cove restaurant?
Oh, yeah.
There was a motel
Right,
and a restaurant in the front, Italian restaurant.
right.
And every time you would go there, when you left, the whole parking lot would be full of raccoons.
Right.
They would be looking in the window.
Waiting for the food, yes.
He had the best veal parmesan. I used to love to get it there. Yeah, that's no longer there. It was just a little one-story motel, about maybe 4 or 5 rooms. I was born in Miami, so it's 1937. I've seen a lot of changes. Key Biscayne was great. It's still okay. It's good.
Still nice.
Kind of like South Beach now, but no, it was good that they made a park. They had planned on putting all high-rises and developing it at one time. As a matter of fact, they planned on making a highway from Key Biscayne to Elliot's Key to Key Largo. Yeah, that was their big plans at one time. Thank God they didn't do that.
Thank you very much, and thank you. It was a nice interview, and I appreciate you coming and giving us some insight into the way the key used to be. So
I'm glad to
thank
give
you
it to
very
you
much.
guys to
Thank
keep
you.
it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your rendition of the key, and I hope to see you again. And thank you for giving us the things for the foundation. Thank you. To be a member is $25 a year. It's the cheapest thing you can ever do. And it creates a lot of help in more of these videos. Thank you.